point. You were recorded, but we can delete the recording of this part.
Not a problem.
But you weren't live streamed yet. I'm about to start the live stream.
I saw it.
You just started it. You just started it. Yeah.
There you go.
Julie, it would be fun to catch up sometime when you get a chance.
I would love to. I would love to. Are you in New York now, or are you in the country?
I'm in New York, but we could find a time, either
Good,
online
good.
or we'll find a time.
Now that we can all meet in person again, mostly, it's really a machaya. It's nice to be able to do all this work online and see so many people around the world. And it's nice to be able to be together in person. So Noah, thank you. Where are we seeing you from?
Oh, you're seeing me from my fake room.
Okay. The best place to be.
Yeah. It looks like John's cottage, my background.
It does. It does.
John, I'm making you a co-host just in case if something happens to me, there's somebody else in charge.
Say it again.
I made you a co-host just so there's more than one person.
Oh, I think that's a mistake. Don't
Don't worry, I'll move it after.
And Noah, if you want to, I'm a pretty experienced
Oh, there you go.
person. I don't mind being a co-host.
I'm waiting for my colleague who's supposed to be hosting it to join in.
Hi, Stu. Nice to see you.
Hi,
Nice to see you,
Stuart.
Stu.
Hi, Julie. How are you?
Good to see you.
Shlomo coming on?
Yeah, he should be on any minute.
Congratulations, John.
Thank you. Thank you, Stu.
Where are you physically?
I'm in the city at the moment. I assume you're in Washington.
Yeah. We just hosted at the Holocaust Museum.
You hosted, I didn't hear the,
We just hosted Ken Burns at the Holocaust Museum for his new
series.
it's really, really powerful.
Right.
He'll be showing the 18th, 19th, and 20th on PBS.
He says it's the most significant piece of work that he's done.
Yeah, it's really, really powerful. It's based on an exhibition that we had to have at the museum, special exhibition called the American Experience in the Holocaust.
You know, Stu, when you were appointed, I remembered the visit that Yitz and I made to you when you were working in the White House to move the idea.
Yeah.
That's a few days ago.
And Yitz ended up being the executive director of the commission. He's in Israel, I think.
Yes. It was a nice thing. He had his wedding anniversary. I saw it on Facebook yesterday, like 60 years, 55 years. Very honest statement of his.
He's a remarkable guy.
Yes.
He had a major influence on my life and my late wife's by being the speaker at a Atlanta Jewish Federation retreat for young leaders in 1973. I'd just come back from Yad Vashem. Ended up, we sent our kids to day school. And really was profoundly important. Do you have a current contact for him?
I can get it for you. I'll get it. And
Okay.
I've been in touch directly with him for a different reason. So I'll get it and send it to you later. If not today, tomorrow.
You know, we're doing another Defiant Requiem concert for Federation in November.
For New York?
Yeah.
I didn't. That's great. Great. That Lincoln Center event was amazing.
Yeah, we did two in Lincoln Center.
Right. We honoring Ernie.
Yeah.
Hi, shalom everyone. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Looks like we have a couple of people still arriving, but I think we're going to start. Thank you for joining us for this Zoom event on the state of Israel, the diaspora, and the nation-state law, findings from the JPPI World Jewish Dialogue. I'd like to welcome those of you joining us on this platform, as well as everyone following proceedings live via social media on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Since the founding of the State of Israel, policymakers have engaged in vigorous debate on the subject of Israel-Diaspora relations. In July 2018, the passing of Israel's nation-state law upgraded Israel's commitment to diaspora Jewry, enshrining it in a constitutional obligation. Article 6 of the nation-state law delineates Israel's connection to and responsibility for the Jewish people in the diaspora, promising, among other things, to maintain its ties with Jews outside Israel and to preserve the cultural, historical, and religious heritage of those Jews. The World Jewish Dialogue Project, headed by Dr. Shlomo Fisher and Dr. John Ruskay, chose the provisions of the nation-state law as their project theme for this year. They brought together the voices of Jewish leadership to determine whether those commitments are desirable, practical, and how they can be operationalized. I now invite Professor Yedidia Stern, President of the JPPI, to give some opening remarks.
You're muted.
Here we go. Now you can hear me. Okay, sorry for that. Shalom, everyone, and thank you for joining our annual presentation of the Jewish World Dialogue. This year's dialogue focused on Israel-Diaspora relationship. This is obviously not a new topic. Nevertheless, we decided to revisit it because of two reasons: change in reality that we are experiencing and change in the normal framework of this relationship. First, the change in reality. As you all know, the relationship used to be that on one hand, Israel relied on the support of the brothers and sisters abroad, and on the other hand, Jews outside of Israel crystallized important part of their Jewish identity around Israel. The two parts of this equation are changing to some degree. Israel is more self-sufficient now and less dependent on the support that used to be critical in the past. And at the same time, Israel is not necessarily central for the identity of some 40% of the young generation of North American Jews. Generally speaking, the natural sense that we are one people is unfortunately eroding. There are general universal reasons for this. We are living in a postmodern age, the impact of social media and other reasons, but it is also, I believe, a result of significant differences between the life experiences of Israeli and diaspora Jews, as well as concrete disagreements over national, religious, and cultural issues. The second reason for revisiting Israel-diaspora relationship has to do with the fact that the State of Israel has upgraded its commitment to diaspora Jewry through a new constitutional obligation written in the Basic Law Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people. Some of us like this Basic Law, some of us dislike it, but as you already heard, this Basic Law, which is part of our emerging constitution, says that Israel will act to preserve ties between the state and Jews living outside of Israel, and that the state will act to preserve the Jewish heritage of diaspora Jewry. But what is the meaning of this commitment? And how should Israel proceed to fulfill this obligation? Well, the authors of this dialogue report, Dr. John Ruskay and Dr. Shlomo Fisher, both senior fellows at Jppi, recommend a polyphonic approach to our shared identity, and John will explain it in a minute. One thing is, I think, clear. The secret of maintaining Jewish brotherhood, even in an era of disagreement, lies on our ability to be tolerant of one another. Our life circumstances differ. Our choices, personal and collective, are not identical, but we are still one people. So again, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours, Nadia.
Thank you so much, Yedidia, for highlighting some of the shifting trends impacting Israel-diaspora relations. We're now going to move to Dr. John Ruskay, who's going to present his findings from the World Jewish Dialogue.
Thank you, Nadia, and it's good to so many friends and colleagues that are with us this morning or this afternoon. I would say, as we all know, this is not a new subject. In fact, many of us, including those on this Zoom call right now, have been involved in intensive dialogues since the mid-'80s on this subject and know the impact that such dialogues can have. We'll come to that with the recommendations. But hence, this is not new, but as Yedidia just said, what is new is now in a nation-state law, the commitment of the Israeli government to act on this matter, both on this relationship between diaspora and Israeli Jews and on strengthening heritage, Jewish education of diaspora Jews. So the purpose of this was very focused, was to see if engaging Jewish leadership could develop a set of recommendations that JPPI and others could place on the table of the Israeli government as they seek to determine how to move forward. That has been the purpose, and that was the purpose of the 2021 Global Dialogue, which we convened. You've read the report, many of you. It's there. I'll be brief, and we have two wonderful commentators, friends as well, to offer their views. 16 sessions were conducted, 14 of them virtual, with 301 participants. Participants were from North America, most of them, Australia, and Israel. Sessions were convened by Jewish federations, Zionist federations, Columbia University Hillel. Given the focus on Jewish education, we asked the Jewish Education Project to convene educators. So we would have their views could be included in our thinking. And they had two sessions of excellent educators from throughout North America. The Masa program was also involved, and in Israel and Tel Aviv, a program for outstanding education students in Israel. The sessions were convened by large federations, New York, Cleveland, Chicago, as an example, and smaller federations like the Atlantic Council, most of you don't even know it, which is the Federation of Nova Scotia, etc. We do this work and we get quantitative data as well. We'll come back to that. So the participants of these 300 do not reflect what I would call Amcha, Jewish population as a whole. It reflects actually a younger cohort of highly engaged Jews and Jewish leadership. Lamashal, example, 64% were under 45 years of age. Majority were women. Modern Orthodox identified themselves as 17% of the participants identified themselves as modern Orthodox, 35% conservative. Here, overrepresented from the general population, but I believe closely reflecting the demographics of engaged leadership. The left wing was somewhat overrepresented among Israelis. In Melbourne, Australia, it was a substantially more right-wing and Orthodox group. And as a whole, the participants were those that participated in the dialogues were more traditionally religious and more liberal politically than the general Jewish population. The methodology we used, as we have always in these dialogues, was two-part. There's a quantitative and a qualitative element. Quantitatively, after an introduction, everyone spends 5 to 8 minutes, 10 minutes, completing an online survey. And that allows us to have all sorts of data, both about the participants and their views on subjects. So that's a survey. And then we delve into small, particularly since COVID, breakout groups, virtually convened, 5 to 8 people, where we both introduce the subjects and then elicit through prompts their views on how we should proceed. There were 3 breakout groups, introductions of breakout groups. One was on the state of Israel-Diaspora relations. We wanted to contextualize it. Many, including some people on this call, Zoom, have written books on this subject. The difference between living in a majority culture, living with sovereignty, and those of us who live as a minority without sovereignty, and far more. So we introduce that, evoke views about how they feel about the other. More specifically, the second was actually on eliciting their views on how to strengthen diaspora-Israel relations, what they sought should be the objective, what methodology should be used. And the third was for the government of Israel, how to strengthen Jewish education, etc. So the findings. First of all, despite all the differences, the majority of older participants said, and that's one quote, in essential matters, all Jews are similar and can identify with each other. The younger participants, on the other hand, spoke repeatedly about a growing distance between American and Israeli Jews. Again, not a shock in the discussions. These participants, and again, the group was younger than most, and mentioned the differences in the recent lived experience that they've had. Said differently, they did not live through and experience 67 and 73 and more, as many of us with less hair or silver hair might have. However, despite the differences generationally, overwhelmingly, the participants were positive about the potential impact of increased involvement of the government of Israel in strengthening diaspora-Israel relations. Generally, in the area of Jewish education. First, on the area of Jewish education, somewhat to our surprise, actually, virtually everybody, there was virtual unanimity about the welcoming the greater involvement of the Israeli government in Jewish education, both in curriculum areas and in funding areas. But many were also suspicious or cautious of Israeli government motives and, quote, strings attached. And this was expressed repeatedly by those who were in the groups that were more experienced as volunteer or professional leaders. Without prompting, many expressed the view that the Israeli government should focus in strengthening Jewish education of Israelis, and especially should educate them about diaspora Jewry. Many expressed the view that Israeli Jews do not know about diaspora communities, nor do they appear to really care. So that was on the Jewish education front. In the discussion on advancing ties, we first wanted to clarify how the groups felt, what the objectives of strengthening Israel diaspora ties should be. There were different possibilities. Should it strengthen advocacy? Should it strengthen the ability to provide additional support? Again, somewhat to our surprise, the largest group, 42%, the area they focused on most was to strengthen mutual understanding. Diaspora Jews of Israelis and Israelis of diaspora Jews. 83% in terms of how to do it endorsed the notion of increased encounters and dialogues between ordinary people from Israel and the diaspora. They all repeatedly said there are many at the leadership level, rabbis, Jewish educators, federation leaders, communal leaders, etc., but not enough taking place between and among. I'm talking about diaspora Israel encounters. And they spoke, this is not programmatic, about how to find JCCs that could meet with counterparts, synagogues, counterparts, communities, how Israelis that are here, how we could find ways of engaging them in ongoing dialogues here. They also expressed the view that they were willing and interested to spend time with people that they disagreed with, would be an important framework in Israel-diaspora relations. But again, repeatedly, diaspora Jews were uncertain if Israeli Jews have a reciprocal interest in learning and spending time with diaspora Jews per se. 3 policy recommendations, those of you that read the report have seen them. 1, broad agreement that if the objective is to strengthen relations between Israeli and diaspora Jews, the government of Israel should significantly invest in developing diaspora studies or studies of the Jewish people or of world Jewry for the Israeli public school system. This would be a major undertaking. You'd have to deal with professional development, the resources, time and curriculum. No one believes this is easy. But what came out of this, somewhat again to our surprise, was the desire of at least the leadership we engaged to focus on diaspora education, particularly in Israel. 2, substantially increase the opportunities for encounters between Israeli and diaspora Jews should be scaled up, so far greater numbers beyond leadership could have the chance to meet, interact, and learn with and from each other. Some ideas were there, but this is a broad direction. And 3rd, regarding Jewish education, given the concerns that were expressed repeatedly, a collaborative process involving Israeli and diaspora leadership should be established, whether by the Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, Jewish Agency with Jewish Agency, JFNA, and leadership to think carefully and together about how the government of Israel ought to actualize this commitment to strengthen Jewish heritage, Jewish education of world Jewry, of diaspora Jewry. These are the 3 recommendations that the report comes to. Our hope is, based on what we hear now from our respondents, to take these recommendations and advance them to leadership in Israel and at important diaspora groups to see if there can be traction and move them forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing those fascinating insights with us. I should mention that the report is available in printed form like this, and also on the JPPI's website. Before I call upon the next 2 speakers to respond, I just want to mention that we're going to have Q&A after that. And so you'll be able to ask questions on the screen, but also if you prefer to put them in the chat, you can put them in the chat as they arrive. So I'd now like to invite Dr. Nachman Shai, Minister of Diaspora Affairs, to respond.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I don't know where you are all now. So anyhow, in Israel, it's early evening. So I wish you all good evening. I was given in advance some of the recommendations, so I'm quite familiar with the general direction, and I would like to respond. But first, I would like to thank everyone for the very intensive and in-depth work that you have done. It is quite impressive that Jppi led this discussion, and I've just heard from my good friend John Ruskay how hard you worked with 16 discussions and 300 participants, and it included Australia, United States, and Israel, and some other information about the participants. So it makes it quite as I said, an impressive report. I would generally say that I'm quite familiar with the directions and with the most recommendations. Not that because I've read them in advance, because actually that's what the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs is doing. And if there was no ministry like that, it should have been invested or started right now, because the need, as you realize, is there. The needs are there. And there should be a clear address on the Israeli side to respond to those needs and to those recommendations that you have presented to us. I'm sure, I'm afraid that you are not familiar with what the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs is doing, and on that, I'm a little bit disappointed that, as far as I know, our staff, neither the ministry nor my office, were involved in those discussions, because we could have already shared with you what we have done so far and what we are planning to do in general, in particular, since I took office 15 months ago. First and most important is that we were able to increase the budget of the ministry, and this year we have the largest budget ever for all the ministry's operations, around 300 million shekels, which comes out to almost $100 million. That's much, much more than it was ever been given to the Ministry of Diaspora, which is not the largest ministry, as you may all guess. We also were able to add some staff to the ministry, so that helps us very much. Now, let me tell you what we are doing. Education is the core of our operation, formal and informal. We are covering through a project called United. We are covering currently over 150 schools, Jewish schools around the globe, and we intend every year to increase the number of schools that we are engaged with. At the same time, we are running another, I do it very shortly, another program called, it's part of United, but that deals with preparing informal education and creating a curriculum for digital, so it can be used by schools and educational institutes around the Jewish globe, and we launch it in November. So one program is already running and the other one there. But we are covering around 400 universities in the United States and elsewhere, university campuses, reaching 15,000 students a year, extending, presenting programs about Judaism, Jewish studies, and Israel studies. And that program has been running now for the third or the fourth year, as far as I remember. And I can go into more details if you want, and I can share it with you in writing, because it will be very detailed, and there are a variety of programs that we have been running through an organization called Mosaic, which was established again a few years ago in a partnership of the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and a number of philanthropists from the Jewish world, both in the United States and in Europe. You rightly dealt also with education in Israel. And here I should also mention the project called Amiyut, or Peoplehood, that started a year and a half ago, partnering with an Israeli institute, one of the Israeli institute. It's based on carrying the financial burden together, and we have been approaching quite a number of organizations and individuals, including the Ministry of Education, including the military, the IDF, and others, offering them programs on Jewish diaspora. We are quite familiar of the lack of knowledge within the young generation of Israelis, in particular, but in the general public as well, about the diaspora. And education is no doubt, John Ruskay is an expert on that education is the best way to approach as many as possible. We have met twice the Minister of Education, and we asked her to introduce in the formal curriculum the topic of Jewish diaspora. She was not very excited about that, I have to admit, and will continue the pressure. This week, Sunday, the government dedicated half of the weekly meeting on the Ministry of Education, and I spoke there, as I do in other topics, and I specifically mentioned the lack of diaspora affairs, Jewish diaspora studies in the curriculum of schools in Israel, but I can't promise you that after that it will be done. It's based on the attitude of the Ministry of Education that is not very excited about that, and about other topics as well, but we'll continue the pressure. We do the same with the military, where there are thousands and thousands of young people, and we should integrate diaspora, Jewish diasporas, the topic and the studies into their military courses, starting with the basic ones up to the highest level of the National War College of Israel, where it exists already, but we have to strengthen it. So we are very much aware of the need to deal more and more on diaspora affairs within Israel. It's a topic that was it's not part of our daily business, to be honest with you. And my role as a government minister is to keep pressing the media and the media and other public institutes to deal with the diaspora. I'm telling you, based on my general experience, including the specific one in the past year, it's not easy. And the public doesn't listen very much when it comes to diaspora, but doesn't mean that we have to give up. We'll continue the pressure. Talking about physical meetings, we all familiar with Birthright and Masa, but we added this year another program called Route One. It's based on a basic donation of Bernie Marcus of $20 million, and we decided to join the program, which will bring to Israel thousands of high school students for a few weeks from United States and later on from Europe. And there'll be governmental money there as well. There's another program called Momentum, which brings Jewish women to Israel. We have brought so far almost 10,000, and will bring more in the future. So we are very much open to all the ideas that were raised by you. I will wait for a detailed report, and I can, at the same time, I will make sure that each and every one of you will get a report about what we have been doing, what we are doing, and what our plans are, so you'll know what the directions where we are taking now to strengthen the relationship between the Jewish diaspora and the state of Israel. That's it for the time being.
Thank you so much for sharing with us some of the work of the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. We'll now hear from Rabbi Julie Schonfeld, former Executive Vice President of the Rabbinical Assembly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to John and Shlomo for this very important study, and to Nachman, to Minister Shai for your responses to it. Interestingly, I am very much, as I see many people on the call are, sort of a veteran of, what John alluded to, these, many, many years of discussions between Israeli officials and the diaspora. And I think that the report and its findings are extremely insightful as to the directions in which we need to go. And it's very, very encouraging to hear from Nachman the steps that have already been taken. Interestingly, as I was reading the report in this particular case, very authentically, I read it not through the eyes as a rabbi and the former CEO of one of the stream organizations, but actually as a mother of Jewish youth. I have a son who is he just started his junior year in high school, another son we just dropped off for college. And what really struck me very strongly in looking at the report is my sense of the tremendous numbers of challenges and important issues that Jews, that Jewish young people, that Jewish families are facing around the world and that we share in common. And those teachings we have from community organizing, that you really want to help people look at what are the things that keep you up at night, what are the pain points, what are the things not that we institutionally want to change, but what are the things that people themselves are wanting to change. And I also want to, by the way, in follow up to the report on programs already going on, say that I viewed again firsthand this summer the Mishlachat at Camp Ramah Nayak, and what it meant to my son, who was a counselor there, to make all of these friends from Israel, who he's trying to figure out how to get the airfare together to go and visit them in the winter holidays. But what happens when you see kids coming together, especially in light of the unique circumstances in which we are now living in the aftermath of the pandemic, we see a number of really shared priorities for our Jewish youth around the world, in Israel and in the diaspora. And I want to suggest that those are four. One, that our education systems are not meeting the needs of a world in which the lingua franca is language and not words. Second, that the digital age has brought us into a winner-take-all society, so that in Israel, in the US, in Europe, that everywhere there are some people who have benefited very much as early investors in the digital age, and yet there's also a lot of downward mobility and a lot of struggle for people to figure out how to educate themselves, how to prepare. We see that there is also, as we know, a worldwide mental health crisis brought on and certainly exacerbated by the pandemic, caused by isolation, caused by a disruption in education that these kids suffered. And to that, I want to just mention quickly two very related data points. A study at the end of 2021 by Maccabi Health Services, the second largest HMO in Israel, has 2.3 million insured. They looked back at 200,000 adolescents in 1996 and in 2001. And they found that particularly among Jewish girls in Israel, they exhibited increases of 68% increase in depression, 67% in eating disorders, 42% in anxiety, and 29% in stress-related diagnoses. And finally, I want to mention, of course, that a tremendous amount of this anxiety and depression also relates to kids growing up in a world in which many of the institutions that we all took for granted, those of us who grow up in a different age, the stability of those democratic institutions, they are constantly bombarded with information that they are under tremendous threat of instability. And also, of course, climate change and the tremendous impact that that is having on young people. So this is not to differ from, but actually to sort of, look at the findings of the study and look at the programs to which Minister Shai is referring. And to say, I think we have a tremendous number of avenues as Jewish leaders to really address the most pressing problems faced by Jewish young people that they share in Israel and in the diaspora. Israel not only has these tremendous things to offer us in terms of being, our homeland, but also, as we know, Israel is on the forefront of cognitive science, right? The solutions that are being sought to these tremendous, this is a tremendous threat. We're talking about, I should have said also, UJA did a study that showed that depression and anxiety among Jewish youth in areas covered by UJA had doubled during the pandemic. So we are talking about tremendous threats to our Jewish young people who we should educate about the diaspora, but maybe part of the way to do that is to help them, to bring shared solutions for them. So I mentioned cognitive science, and then I would be remiss as a rabbi if I didn't say sort of the obvious, that Judaism is, par excellence, one of world civilization's greatest cognitive and behavioral tools for living a good life. And that is what people are telling us is the answer to this so-called mental health crisis. I think that's a misnomer. I think we're actually in a worldwide cognitive crisis, but Judaism has so much to offer, whether you present it in the realm of sacred stories and religion, or whether you present it in the realm of shared culture in terms of how it helps us constantly reach out to other people, put ourselves in community, all of the things we know, praying together, celebrating together, dancing together on the migrash at Ramah Nayak, eating together. So I hope that as we look at this, kind of going back to the 80s, maybe even before, these differences that we've had, that we can use this moment of very serious challenges facing Jewish children and youth around the world, and use this as our opportunity, because I think that they share a lot in common. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much for drawing to some of the pressing issues facing young Jewish adults today. Now we're going to move over and open the floor to questions from the audience. I'm going to move my view so I can see everybody. You can use the raise hand function, or you can just talk. You can also add questions in the chat. The truth is, I think I have a question. I've got to raise, no. I can see I have a question in the chat. It says, this whole thing began with the nation state law. Do you think this represents a real shift in priorities on the part of the Israeli government? Would like to answer that?
You are asking that to any of us?
It doesn't say.
Well, I welcome the question, and I was going to ask my friend Nachman Shai, who we worked together for many years to in birthright terms, Masa, Onward, etc. And obviously, kol hakavod for the present efforts. I think this is the body of what we were suggesting is how do we scale this up and so we can impact more. And I would turn to you, Nachman, and ask, is there any way that we, world Jewish leadership, could be helpful in this process? In other words, I heard you saying that you repeatedly was speaking at cabinet meetings, and no doubt others. You work every angle you can to advance the agenda. And my question to you is do you have any advice on how world Jewry could be supportive, if at all? Or is this just something that we just need to wait to see my year? I don't know.
Okay, thank you, John. Yes, of course, you are our partners, and you share with us, and we share with you the same concerns. I'm absolutely engaged with that and looking for every way I can bring together Jewish diaspora and the people of Israel, and looking for ways to strengthen the relationship. And every idea is most welcome. I think that we are already taking the right directions, and what I need is to do, if I may say, more of the same. Instead of investing in people or in Amiyut in Israel, 8 million shekels a year, which is in 2 years actually, it's no money. If we can double the sum and of that sum of money and do more things in Israel, and to help educate more Israelis about the diaspora, and we know how, but we are limited by budget constraint. The same applies to United, for example. United covers currently, as I said before, around 150 schools. We may reach more, 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 a year, but there are 1,500 Jewish schools in the world. Let's say 800 are falling under our responsibility because others don't want to have any contact with us. So even this is huge. I just calculated it will take us 7 or 8 years to get to all those schools, so to integrate Jewish studies or Israeli studies into their curriculum. 7, 8 years is a long time. If we have more financial resources, we can cut the timetable to half or one quarter. That's what we have to do. The same applies to Route 1. The same applies even to Masa. We have no financial issues with Taglit, thanks God, and thanks to the Edelson family. We are fine with Taglit. But other programs, they all need money. It's all about money. Of course, I'm ready to sit down with you and get some new ideas, which is fine. I told you, we have the financial resources, but we need partnership. We can't do it only by ourselves. The state of Israel, the finance ministry would like to share these missions or to partner with other organizations or philanthropists or foundations from the Jewish world. That's the requirement. We can't do it by ourselves. That's the system which the state of Israel decided to run that business. Good or bad, this is the reality. I'm unable to change it now. I'm unable because of the election period to do many things, but that's something different. So it's a matter of money. If we have more funds for that holy goal, if I may say, we'll do much more. And I'm sure that I can convince the Israeli side to allocate more money, because that government is fully convinced that Jewish diaspora is an integral part of the Jewish people, and we have to work together in order to reach the same goals. And it's the prime minister, the alternate prime minister, the finance minister. Really, I can see the entire cabinet in front of me right now, and I have many partners there. But it has to be done by both parties. It cannot be done just by the state of Israel.
Thank you. We have a few questions coming in, so we're going to take 3 questions at once now. The first is in the chat. It says, the Jewish Agency has engaged in many initiatives through its Connect unit to address this issue. Has anyone looked at them to see if they're making any difference? And then we're going to move on to questions. If Yedidia, you could ask your question, and then Michael, if you could ask yours, and then we'll respond to it.
Yeah, I'll make it very short. I think the main issue is not money. The main issue is will. Israelis do not care enough, and many of our brothers outside of Israel do not care enough. And the strategic issue is, how can we change the will of the people to invest in the brotherhood between us, to make us one under new conditions. There's new conditions, not more the same. Talking as an Israeli, I would say that the Israeli taxpayer should be much more involved in the future of half of our nation who are not Israelis. In order to achieve this, you need to educate next generations of youngsters in Israel to understand the importance of the other half of the nation. Israelis are nationalists, you know that. But the meaning of being nationalist is not only being right-wing, it is also taking responsibility for the nation. for those who are not necessarily citizens of the State of Israel. What needs to be done for the longer run, and this is a long run, everything is long run here for us Jews, we need to educate every Israeli kid in high school and later on in the university about our people who are not citizens of the State of Israel. At the beginning of it, as Shai said, Nachman said, the minister, there is a beginning of it. It's not enough. Peoplehood is not known as a field in Israel. It should be a field of intellectual and emotional engagement for Israelis. Without moving this forward, since Jews who are not Israelis do not vote in Israel, things will not change. So if you ask me what will be number one for the long run as a strategic plan in order to implement our responsibility according to the nation state, Israel as a nation state of the Jewish state for everybody, is educating Israelis about the brothers outside of Israel. We at Jppi are going to invest a lot in this because we believe this is the long run solution that needs to be done. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to take Michael Wow's question, please.
Hi. So I applaud the study, and I certainly applaud and recognize the importance of educating as a significant step. But I think something has to be done even before that in the educational process, and that is we have to agree on a shared reality. And one of the problems is I think we're in a case of a cognitive dissonance where perceived realities of what Israel and diaspora look like are kind of very different. So for most diaspora Jews, they support a two-state solution. They believe in a peace process. But most Israelis have given up on the peace process and they feel there isn't a partner for peace. Most Israelis feel that diaspora Jews are at peril, both from anti-Semitism and intermarriage, and should make aliyah, while most diaspora Jews feel that they're pretty comfortable and that diaspora communities are stable and will not only survive, but will thrive. And just another example is diaspora Jews are really concerned about the Kotel issue. And for 99% of Israelis, it's a total non-issue. So I think as part of that educational process, we actually must first agree about what reality is, what the facts are, what the problems are, and then can we start the dialogue and educate each other about how to work closer together.
Okay, so we're just going to take one more question in this round from Michael Siegel, and then we're going to go to answers from the speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I did unmute myself. Let me do it again. Am I on? Am I good? Okay, thank you. So somebody asked a question, let me answer it. The Jewish Agency has metrics on literally every program that they run. If you're interested in the outcome of any of the Jewish Agency programs, contact Chevy Greenfield, who will provide any data that you need. Secondly, when you actually stick to the issue, I think, of what the report was about, which was the issue of connectivity between the diaspora and Israel, as opposed to all the other issues that are confronting youth and the Jews and Israel. If you leave all that aside and said, what are we going to do about connectivity? A number of years ago, at a what's called a coordinating committee between the Jewish Agency and the government of Israel, the prime minister at the time basically challenged the Jewish community to do partnership with city to city. There is tremendous outcome relative to that program. I think we have to look at this issue of connectivity in the same realm. But I do think we have to focus on where outcome can actually lead to the desired change, which is you have to basically throw a lot of things away and focus on people who are under 18 years old. And it is a person-to-person connectivity. If you go to the Montessori methodology, people of age learn from other people of their own age and their contemporaries. They don't learn from 70-year-olds or 50-year-olds how 15-year-olds should look at connectivity to the world. So what we have to do is figure out an avenue in which more youth of Israel, more youth of the diaspora are connecting in a way using, whether it's person to person, whether it's more trips to Israel for younger people, or whether it is the new world that we live in data communications, whether we use social media. But in essence, you're not going to have an outcome change of connectivity to Israel if you don't get the 15-year-olds before they get to college to understand that there is this, connectivity of family of Am Israel. So we've got to focus on younger. Leave all the other programs. They're all great. They're all they all make a difference for a very small minority. But if we don't change the youth, we're not going to change the outcome.
So who would like to give answers to any of those questions that we collected in that round?
What was your question, Nadia?
So we just collected a few questions from the audience. One I think has just been answered. And we took some questions about going forward. Is this a priority for Israelis? Would you be interested in answering?
I don't know whose role. Oh, I see my colleague Shlomo Fisher has his hand up. So since he's been listening here, maybe we might ask him. My partner.
Shlomo, go ahead.
Okay, no, just relating to that comment about different realities. I mean, one of the things that came out very strongly in the sessions was the fact there was a great awareness of different realities, and that's why they said that they wanted mutual understanding. They do not expect this process of encounter and of mutual education to result in the same views. They do not expect that. They do not expect American Jews to become as traditional and conservative as Israelis. They don't expect Israelis to become American Jewish liberals, but they do want a conversation in which they will reach some sort of understanding of the other, some sort of understanding of where people come from. So they have a different vision. They have a vision of Jewish education not based on what we called in the report, what we called the monophonic conversation, but rather they really want a polyphonic conversation, and that is where several voices can be heard together, and that nevertheless there will be a sense of harmony, and there'll be a sense of one people with the separate voices. That's what that was very strongly reported in all the sessions that we've had. I just wanted to make that comment.
By the way, I would like to build on that if I may, and I know we're running out of time. I was involved in the dialogues between something called the North American Jewish Forum and the Israeli Forum back in the mid-'80s. These were extraordinary gatherings of then young leadership, emerging leadership, diverse, right, left, religious, secular, etc. And what I experienced was the relationships that were created there with those we agreed with and those that we did not have been life-lasting and shaping, and realized we were in this together, even though we have very different view and continue to on a range of critical issues about who we are. We're in it together. And that notion about encounters, I just want to say, I don't think the different issues, yes, the issues are out there, but those encounters can lead to a sense of connection and mishpacha, and Am Yisrael, and Amiyut, very powerful. I heard Michael's focusing on 15-year-olds. For me, it was in my mid-30s. I think it can happen multiple times in life. And I just want to comment, Yedidia's point about will, kavanah. If there is will, this could all be scaled up. What Nachman spoke about is kol hakavod, impressive, and much more, what the agency's doing, and I'm a deep believer in what they're doing. But if we're there's an opportunity, and how to evoke the will, and then we'll find the means. That would be a huge undertaking, and in my view, a very important focus.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and apologies to all of you whose questions we didn't manage to get to. We're now going to move on to concluding remarks by Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat.
Thank you. I want to first say that this dialogue initiated by Jppi under the leadership of Shlomo and John underscores the important role that the Jewish People's Policy Institute plays in focusing on Israel-Diaspora relations. There are hardly any other groups outside of the Israeli government that are doing so. So kol hakavod and congratulations. A couple of points. There is clearly a disturbing distance of young American Jews from Israel for two reasons. One is a political divide between a generally left of center American jury, particularly those who are young, college age, over a whole variety of issues, Palestinian issues, feeling of second-class treatment of reform and conservative Jews by the Orthodox rabbinate, the collapse of the long negotiated Natan-Sharansky agreement on the wall, and many other issues. Second, and this is something that's not mentioned in the report, nor in the recommendations, and that is part of the reason, I believe a significant reason for the distancing is because of a distancing by diaspora Jews from Judaism itself. Intermarriage rates, according to recent Pew studies, of non-Orthodox are approaching 70%, with very low conversion rates by the non-Jews. And this lack of identification by younger Jews, particularly more liberal, reform, and even conservative Jews, is very revealing, and is, I think, if you don't identify with Judaism to begin with, you're not going to identify with Israel. Next, we are in fact moving, as the report indicates, and as Yedidia's summary indicates, from this monophonic relationship to a polyphonic relationship, and we should all engage in that process, recognizing that we're not trying necessarily to change opinions, but to have people understand that despite the differences, that we are one people. I mean, I have grave differences during the Trump presidency with the Trump policy, but that didn't make me any less loyal to the United States. And so we have to have a mindset that because we may disagree with Israeli policy, it doesn't mean we shouldn't identify with Israel as a Jewish state and with the Israeli people. Next is the issue of funding. I think it's terrific that Minister Shai is participating. It would have been great to have him involved earlier, but the fact that he is heading a Ministry of Diaspora Affairs is itself a step forward. His statement that the Ministry of Education is not as enthusiastic as he is about diaspora education is a concern, but it simply means that we have to do more to elevate its importance. Now, with respect to funding of Jewish education, there are two aspects that the JPPI study makes. One is more funding for diaspora education within Jewish schools in Israel, and the minister identified that as a need, something that he's trying to get more funding for. He mentioned 1,500 schools that are being covered, and that's terrific. It's at least something to build on. However, one of the barriers to Jewish education, and I say this as one whose two kids went to Jewish day school, is the extraordinarily high cost of Jewish education. It turns off many Jewish parents who would like to send their kids to Jewish schools or even to Jewish camps. So to the extent that Israeli government money can be used to lower those costs, to subsidize the cost of Jewish education and day school education, would be a tremendous step forward in encouraging more Jewish studies and more Jewish identification, which will lead in and of itself to greater identification with the state of Israel. So I think that this is a very good start. The report is a very good start. The broader issue that I've raised of a lack of Jewish identification is something beyond this report itself, but it is, I think, at the core of one of the reasons why we have a lack of identification by young people with Israel.
Close it.
Sorry.
Close it.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Eizenstat, for those remarks. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. That concludes our
I do want to mention one other thing, if I might. I found from years when I was president of the JCC in Greater Washington, we had a shaliach. There is no shaliach now. And having more shaliachs in camps, in federations around the country would be a very important initiative.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
May I say one word, please? Or just to thank everyone and to tell you that my ministry is available for any request, any idea, any proposal which will come from you. We are working closely with the Jewish Agency and with Jppi and other Jewish organizations in the United States and elsewhere. And whatever you need from us, you'll be, in general, as much as it's possible, you will be responded and given. We truly believe in the relationship and between diaspora, the Jewish diaspora and Israel, and we'll do our best. This government term is coming to an end, but there'll be a new government sooner or later, and I'm sure and I'm confident that the basic idea that Israel should build and focus on the relationship between us and the diaspora will be there as well. So in between everything you have in mind, I'm as long as I'm there, I'll do my best to go forward and really to do everything to improve the relationship between the two, let's say, parts of the Jewish people, the one in Israel and the one that is out of the country.
Thank you, Nachman. Thank you for these words. Thank you, Stu. Thank you, Shlomo and John and Nadia. And thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Thank you.
Shana Tova.
Thank you.